the stranger who spied on the three Apache sisters and ended up marrying them backslash. Birds were returning to their nests, and the gentle rustle of leaves whispered through the sparse trees. Life in the village had its rhythm, predictable and peaceful, until that day when a stranger appeared. He was unlike anyone the villagers had seen before. His clothes were travel-worn, faded in color, and patched in several places, suggesting he had walked a long distance. His face was weathered, not by age but by the wind, sun, and dust of countless roads. The children noticed him first, their eyes wide with curiosity as they watched him walk slowly along the edge of the settlement. He didn't speak to anyone at first. He simply observed, his gaze soft but attentive, as if he were trying to learn something important about the people and the land. Among the villagers, whispers began to spread. "Who is he?" asked one of the older women. "Where does he come from?" The men, while cautious, did not immediately see him as a threat. Strangers were rare in these parts, and strangers who traveled alone were even rarer. The villagers had learned over time to be wary, yet respectful. And so they watched him, giving him space, yet never letting him disappear from their minds. In the heart of the village lived three sisters. They were known for their courage, intelligence, and independence. People often spoke about how each sister had her own distinct personality, yet they were inseparable. The eldest was calm and wise, often guiding the younger villagers with patience and insight. The middle sister was spirited, quick to laugh, and fearless in her actions. The youngest was gentle yet clever, always observing before she spoke, her mind sharp and full of questions. Together, they were admired and respected, a source of pride for their family and the village. That day, the three sisters noticed the stranger more clearly than anyone else. He was moving along the outskirts of the village, keeping a careful distance, yet his attention seemed fixed on them. At first, they thought he was merely passing through, but the way he lingered, watching their daily routines, unsettled them. The eldest sister frowned slightly. "Look," she said quietly to her siblings, "he has been following us for hours." The middle sister tilted her head, trying to get a better look. "Maybe he is lost," she suggested. "People do get lost in the hills sometimes." But even as she said it, a sense of unease crept into her chest. There was something unusual about him. He didn't act like other travelers. His movements were deliberate, careful, almost respectful. It was as though he was trying not to disturb their world, yet at the same time he wanted to see it all. The youngest sister, who often paid attention to details that others missed, observed something else. "He's not just watching," she whispered. "He's learning. See the way he looks at the way we gather water, the way we tend the animals, he notices everything." Her sisters exchanged glances. The idea that someone could be observing them so closely felt strange. It was not fear that gripped them, but a quiet curiosity mixed with a hint of caution. The stranger's presence soon became a topic of discussion in the village. People speculated about his intentions. Some thought he might be a wandering trader, hoping to find his way into the village to sell goods. Others whispered that he could be a scout, gathering information about the community for reasons unknown. The elders, however, advised patience. "Let us observe him before we act," one of them said. "Time will show us what kind of man he is." As the days passed, the stranger did not approach the village openly. Instead, he appeared at dawn and dusk, watching from a distance. Sometimes he would pause near the edge of the forest, his silhouette outlined against the golden light. The sisters noticed that he seemed particularly interested in their daily routines. They would go about their chores, fetching water, tending animals, weaving baskets, or preparing food, and he would always be there, observing silently, sometimes taking notes in a small leather-bound book he carried. Despite the initial unease, the sisters began to notice qualities in him that were unusual for a stranger. He never touched their belongings, never tried to speak unless spoken to, and never intruded into the village life. His eyes, when they met theirs, were calm, almost gentle, showing no desire to dominate or take control. There was a sense of respect in his gaze, a respect for their space, their independence, and their strength. Curiosity slowly replaced suspicion. The sisters found themselves wondering about his story. Where did he come from? Why was he traveling alone? Why had he chosen to watch them, of all people, instead of anyone else in the village? They whispered to each other, speculating about his past and his intentions, creating stories and imagining adventures he might have experienced on the road. One morning, the eldest sister decided to observe him in return. She quietly followed the trail he often walked along, keeping hidden behind bushes and rocks. She saw him pause, kneel to examine a plant, make notes in his book, and then continue on. He seemed absorbed in the small details of life, studying not just the sisters but the world around him, the way sunlight fell on the hills, the patterns of animal tracks, the flow of the river. It was as though he had come not just to see them, but to understand life itself. The sisters began to talk about him more openly, not just in whispers. "He is strange, yes," the middle sister said one evening as they sat by the fire, "but there is something honorable in him. He doesn't interfere, he doesn't steal, he only watches." The youngest nodded. "I agree. He could be dangerous or he could be kind. We just don't know yet, but I feel curious. I want to understand him as he tries to understand us." Meanwhile, the stranger was not entirely unaware of their attention. He sensed that the sisters had noticed him, and he respected their space even more. He never attempted to approach them directly, knowing that trust had to be earned, not demanded. He left small signs of his presence, gifts of wild herbs, or a piece of fruit near the path they used daily, carefully placed, never intrusive, always thoughtful. These gestures, simple as they were, began to change the way the sisters perceived him. Days turned into weeks, and the stranger became a quiet but constant part of the sisters' lives. He remained an outsider, yet his presence could no longer be ignored. The sisters felt a mix of emotions: curiosity, suspicion, and an emerging sense of connection. They began to watch for him as part of their routine, wondering what he might do next and what he might see in them. The villagers, too, began to notice the change. While some remained cautious, others started to see that the stranger's intentions seemed harmless. The elders observed his patience and respect, qualities rare among travelers who pass through their lands. "Perhaps he is not here to harm," one elder mused. "Perhaps he is here to learn, as we all must learn from life." And so, the stranger remained at the edge of the settlement, neither fully part of their world nor entirely outside it. The sisters continued their lives, weaving baskets, tending to animals, and sharing laughter and stories, all while knowing that eyes were quietly following their every move. It was a delicate balance of curiosity and caution, a dance of observation and respect, one that neither the sisters nor the stranger could fully explain. By the time the sun finally set each evening, casting long shadows over the hills and painting the sky with colors of orange and pink, the sisters found themselves thinking of him not with fear, but with fascination. The stranger had arrived quietly, unnoticed at first, and yet in his silence and patience, he had begun to leave an impression that neither time nor distance could easily erase. The story of the stranger and the sisters was only beginning. What started as cautious observation and curiosity would, in time, become a story of understanding, connection, and the unexpected ways in which people can enter each other's lives. But for now, the stranger remained at the edge of the village, watching, learning, and waiting for the moment when the next chapter of his journey, and theirs, would begin. Days turned into weeks, and the stranger continued to remain at the edge of the Apache settlement. Unlike a traveler who merely passes through, he had settled into a quiet rhythm, moving with careful attention to the land and the people around him. Every morning, as the sun rose and painted the hills in shades of gold, He could be seen walking along familiar paths, pausing to observe the sisters as they began their daily routines. The sisters had grown used to him, though used did not mean comfortable. Their curiosity was growing alongside a subtle, cautious respect. They noticed the way he watched, not with judgment but with patience. He observed everything. The way the eldest sister guided the younger villagers, the way the middle sister moved with fearless energy, and the way the youngest studied and questioned everything around her. He was learning not only their actions but their personalities, their humor, and even the small ways they cared for one another. One morning, as the eldest sister carried water from the river, she noticed the stranger kneeling near a cluster of wildflowers. His notebook lay open beside him, and he was carefully sketching something. Her curiosity got the better of her. "Why does he study everything so closely?" she asked quietly to her sisters later that day. The middle sister laughed softly. "Perhaps he wants to know the secrets of the river, or maybe he wants to learn how we live so well here." The youngest shook her head, her sharp eyes thoughtful. "He is not just learning about the river or the village. He is learning about us. I can feel it. Every action we take, he notices. It's as if he wants to understand how we think, how we live, how we care for each other." The sisters agreed to keep a watchful eye on him, not out of fear but to understand why he had chosen to follow them. They began observing his routines as well. They noticed that he never interfered with their lives or the village. He did not take anything that did not belong to him, nor did he ask for help unless it was absolutely necessary. Instead, he seemed to immerse himself in the land, learning from the earth, the river, and the creatures that moved around them. The villagers began to notice a small but meaningful change. While some remained wary, others saw signs that the stranger meant no harm. He was cautious, respectful, and surprisingly kind. Occasionally, he would leave small gifts, a bundle of herbs for an elder, a piece of fruit for a child, or carefully cleaned and arranged firewood near the community's cooking area. These gestures were quiet and unnoticed by many, but the sisters saw them and felt their curiosity transform into something more complex. One day, as the sisters were working near the river, they saw him helping a family of animals caught in a small trap. With gentle hands, he freed the creatures and carried them to safety, showing care and respect for life. The youngest sister whispered to her siblings, "See, he does not just watch us, he helps the world around us quietly." "That is different from most people." The middle sister nodded. "It is strange. I do not understand why he is here, but I can see he is not a threat. There is goodness in his actions, even if we do not yet know him." The stranger also began to show subtle signs that he was learning more than just their actions. He had noticed the eldest sister's wisdom, the middle sister's courage, and the youngest sister's cleverness. Occasionally, he would imitate small gestures or take notes on the skills he observed. It was not mocking, but a way to understand and respect their way of life. Slowly, the sisters began to see him as someone who could potentially belong, though they remained cautious. One afternoon, the village faced a small crisis. A sudden windstorm swept through the settlement, toppling small trees and scattering supplies. Villagers rushed to secure their homes, animals ran in fear, and the sisters worked quickly to protect the younger children. The stranger appeared from the forest without being called. Calm and composed, he helped secure the supplies, guided the frightened animals to safety, and even assisted an elderly villager who had tripped in the chaos. The sisters watched him with growing admiration. The eldest sister whispered. He did not hesitate. He acted immediately, without fear, without thinking of himself first. The youngest nodded, and he knew exactly what to do. He has been learning, yes, but he also has knowledge. He has skills that we can trust. Even the middle sister, who had always been fearless and quick to act, felt a strange sense of respect for the man who had silently entered their lives. After the storm had passed, the sisters approached him cautiously. "Why do you watch us?" asked the eldest sister, her voice calm but firm. The stranger looked at them, and for the first time he spoke clearly. "I have traveled far," he said softly. "I have seen many places, met many people. But there is something about the way you live, your strength, your care for one another, your connection to the land, that I wanted to understand. I mean no harm. I only wish to learn to see life as it truly is through your eyes." The sisters listened carefully. His words were honest, without arrogance or flattery. They could sense that he was sincere, that his presence had a purpose beyond mere curiosity. The middle sister tilted her head. "You watch us, but you also help when needed. That is unusual." "Most people do not act like that." The stranger nodded. "I believe that understanding comes not just from watching but from helping. One must observe and act with care, not only for oneself but for others." From that day on, the relationship between the sisters and the stranger began to shift. The barrier of suspicion started to dissolve, replaced by cautious trust. The sisters allowed themselves to notice more about him, his gentle manner, his careful speech, and the way he respected their decisions and space. They began to see him not as an intruder, but as someone who might one day become a part of their lives. The stranger, too, was changing. He no longer merely observed from a distance. He began to participate quietly in village life, helping gather food, carrying water, and learning skills directly from the sisters. But he always maintained respect for their independence. He never offered advice unless asked, never took control, and never interfered with their decisions. The sisters found this behavior unusual and admirable. As the days passed, the sisters began to speak more openly about the stranger. "He is not like anyone I have met," said the eldest sister one evening. "He is patient, careful, and kind, and he is learning, but why us? Why not another village, another family?" The youngest sister smiled faintly. "Perhaps he sees what we do not see in ourselves. Perhaps he respects what he admires and he has come to learn from it." The middle sister nodded. "Whatever the reason, I feel we are slowly beginning to understand him too. It is strange, but not unpleasant." The stranger continued to leave small signs of goodwill. He repaired a broken fence without being asked, helped an injured animal, and shared knowledge from his travels when appropriate. The villagers began to notice the change too. Where there had been suspicion, there was now cautious acceptance. Where there had been whispers of fear, there were now conversations about his kindness and skill. Even the elders, who had initially advised patience, began to smile knowingly at the quiet man who had chosen to watch, learn, and respect the sisters' way of life. The sisters began to test his character in small ways, asking him for help or guidance, not out of necessity, but to see how he would respond. Each time, he acted with humility, patience, and care. The eldest sister observed his actions closely, noting how he adapted to each situation without imposing his own ideas. The middle sister admired his courage, though quiet, in facing challenges that came with village life. The youngest sister studied his thoughtfulness, noticing the subtle ways he considered others' feelings before acting. By the end of the second month, the stranger had become a quiet presence in their lives. The sisters no longer felt fear or suspicion when they saw him. Instead, they felt curiosity mixed with a growing sense of trust. They noticed that he had begun to understand not just their actions but the heart of their lives, their relationships, their responsibilities, and the deep bond they shared with one another. And yet, despite the growing trust, there remained a sense of mystery. The stranger had shared little about his past, revealing only that he had traveled far and wished to learn. The sisters respected this secrecy, sensing that it was part of who he was. They also realized that perhaps the story of his life would unfold naturally, not forced by questions, but through shared experiences and actions that spoke louder than words. The days continued with a gentle rhythm. The stranger walked the familiar paths, observed, helped, and slowly became part of the rhythm of the sisters' lives. The sisters, in turn, watched him, learned from him, and began to understand the value of patience, respect, and quiet friendship. What had begun as secret observation had transformed into a silent partnership, an unspoken agreement of mutual respect and curiosity. The story of the stranger and the three Apache sisters was no longer just about observation. It had become a story of connection, trust, and the beginning of a relationship that would one day grow deeper, founded on patience, respect, and the unexpected ways in which people can enter each other's lives. And though the future remained uncertain, one thing was clear: the stranger was no longer merely an outsider. He had begun to belong, quietly, thoughtfully, and respectfully, in the lives of the three sisters. The village had grown accustomed to the stranger's presence. By now, his quiet movements, careful actions, and small gestures of help were no longer surprising to the sisters or the villagers. Yet despite this growing acceptance, the stranger remained something of a mystery. He rarely spoke about his past, choosing instead to observe, learn, and offer assistance when needed. The sisters had grown curious, even comfortable around him, but there was always a distance, a sense that his life and their lives had not yet fully intersected. One afternoon, as the sun climbed high in the sky and the air shimmered with heat, a sudden crisis struck. The river that ran near the village, normally calm and gentle, had swelled unexpectedly after a night of heavy rain in the distant mountains. The water rushed down in a torrent, spilling over its banks and threatening the crops, the homes, and the animals that the villagers depended on. The sisters, already awake and alert in the early hours, noticed the change first. The eldest sister's eyes widened as she ran toward the riverbank. "The river," she shouted, her voice tense. "It's rising faster than I've ever seen." The middle sister grabbed a basket and began moving supplies away from the water. "We need to protect the children and the animals," she cried, her hands trembling slightly but her movements decisive. The youngest sister, ever observant, calculated the areas most at risk and began guiding people to safer ground. The villagers, now fully awake, joined in, but the sheer force of the river made the task overwhelming. Water poured into the lower areas of the village, dragging small tools, baskets, and debris with it. The stranger appeared almost immediately, as if drawn by instinct rather than sight. He moved quickly and calmly, assessing the danger. Without hesitation, he began helping the villagers secure their homes and animals. His hands worked efficiently, tying down loose materials, carrying children to safety, and even directing people to build temporary barriers against the water. He did not command, but quietly guided, suggesting actions that made sense and could be executed quickly. The sisters were both astonished and relieved. The eldest sister ran toward him. "You knew what to do," she exclaimed, panting from the effort of moving supplies. "How did you know?" He shook his head slightly, keeping his voice calm. "I've traveled long and seen many storms. I've learned that when danger comes, panic helps no one. We must act carefully, step by step." He helped the middle sister carry a group of frightened animals to higher ground. The youngest sister followed closely, observing how he moved with confidence but also with care, treating each creature and each person with attention. As the floodwaters rose, the village faced a moment of true crisis. Homes near the river began to fill with water, crops were at risk of being lost, and the villagers struggled to keep their belongings safe. The stranger worked alongside them tirelessly, never complaining, never pausing, only moving from one task to another with an energy that seemed almost endless. He tied makeshift rafts, reinforced embankments, and even helped calm children who were frightened by the roaring water. The sisters noticed something about him during this chaos. Despite the urgency, he remained composed. He did not panic and he did not take over. Instead, he acted in a way that allowed the villagers to maintain their dignity and their sense of control. It was a subtle but important quality, one that made the sisters realize that he was not just skilled, but also wise in ways that they had not yet fully understood. Hours passed, and the floodwaters slowly began to recede. The village was shaken but largely intact, thanks in large part to the stranger's help. The elders, who had observed everything from a safe distance, finally approached him. "You have saved much today," one of them said solemnly. "Many would have lost their homes, their crops, and even their lives without your guidance. For this, we are grateful." The stranger bowed slightly. "I did only what I could," he said softly. "The strength of your people, the wisdom of your sisters, and the care of the village made my actions possible. I am only one among many who work to protect this place." His humility impressed the elders, and they nodded with quiet approval. After the crisis had passed, and the river returned to its normal level, the sisters gathered to talk privately. They were covered in mud, water-stained clothes clinging to their skin, and exhaustion painted on their faces, but there was a sense of relief and even admiration in their eyes. "He was incredible," the middle sister said, shaking her head. "I've never seen anyone handle danger like that. He didn't panic. He didn't take control in a forceful way. He just acted." The eldest sister nodded. "Yes, and he respected everyone while doing it. He didn't make us feel small, even when the danger was overwhelming. He guided, but he didn't order. That is rare." The youngest sister smiled faintly, her eyes thoughtful. "He understands balance. He sees what is needed and gives it without overstepping. I think he has been preparing for moments like this all along. He has been learning, yes, but he also has experience that he shares without making others feel inadequate." That evening, after the village had cleaned and repaired what it could, the sisters invited the stranger to sit with them near the fire. They wanted to know more about him, but not in a way that would force him to reveal his past. Instead, they asked him questions about his thoughts, his observations, and his experiences in helping people during difficult times. He spoke quietly, describing places he had visited, storms he had seen, and people he had met. His words were measured, thoughtful, and filled with humility. The sisters listened intently, realizing that his life had been shaped not only by travel but by learning from the hardships he had encountered. He did not boast, nor did he seek recognition. He simply shared his understanding of life, one lesson at a time. As the fire crackled and the night grew dark, the sisters felt a shift in their perception of him. He was no longer just the stranger who had watched them from afar. He was someone who had demonstrated courage, wisdom, and compassion when it mattered most. They began to see him as a person who could be trusted, whose intentions were pure, and whose presence might be more meaningful than they had initially imagined. In the days that followed, the village slowly returned to normal. Life resumed its rhythm, yet the memory of the flood and the stranger's actions remained vivid. The sisters noticed how the villagers now spoke of him with respect rather than suspicion. Children who had been frightened during the flood began to laugh again, and the elders nodded knowingly when they saw him quietly helping with small tasks. The sisters also began to reflect on their own feelings. The eldest sister admired his wisdom and calmness. The middle sister respected his courage and ability to act under pressure. The youngest sister, who often observed the smallest details, felt a deep appreciation for his thoughtfulness and humility. Slowly, their curiosity had transformed into a bond of trust, even if unspoken. One afternoon, while walking near the river that had caused so much worry, the sisters and the stranger sat together in silence. The water flowed gently now, reflecting the sunlight in sparkling patterns. The eldest sister spoke first. "You saved us and our village," she said quietly. "We did not know you when this began, yet you proved yourself through action, not words." The stranger nodded, a small, humble smile on his face. "I did what I could. But it was your courage, your care for each other, and your wisdom that allowed any of this to succeed. I only helped where I could." The middle sister looked at him thoughtfully. We see now that you are not just a watcher. You are someone who understands life, who acts when needed, and who respects the strength of others. That is rare, and it deserves recognition." The youngest sister, her eyes bright with quiet understanding, added, "We are beginning to understand you as you tried to understand us. Perhaps, in time, we will learn even more about each other. But for now, we are grateful for what you have shown us: patience, courage, and respect." The stranger's eyes softened. He did not speak for long, but his expression conveyed gratitude and humility. In that moment, the bond between him and the sisters had deepened. It was no longer just observation or curiosity. It was trust, forged through shared experience and the trials of a dangerous day. From that day forward, the stranger's presence in the village was no longer met with quiet suspicion. He had proven his worth not through words but through deeds. The sisters felt a growing sense of connection to him, even as they continued to guard their independence and space. They had seen the depths of his character, and in doing so, they had begun to see the potential for a relationship based on mutual respect and understanding. The story of the stranger and the three Apache sisters was evolving. What had begun as silent observation had transformed into active participation, trust, and admiration. The flood had been a turning point, a moment that revealed true character and built bonds that words alone could never create. And though the future remained uncertain, one thing was clear: the stranger was no longer just an outsider. He had become part of their lives, respected, trusted, and slowly, quietly, belonging. Life in the village had slowly returned to its calm rhythm after the flood. The river flowed gently, the crops began to recover, and the villagers resumed their daily routines with renewed care. The stranger, who had once been a silent observer, had now become an essential part of the community in subtle and meaningful ways. Yet he remained modest, never seeking recognition or praise for his actions. He moved quietly, assisting where he could, learning, and, most importantly, respecting the independence of those around him. The three sisters had begun to notice him in new ways. He was no longer just a mysterious presence at the edge of their lives. He had become someone whose guidance, skill, and thoughtfulness mattered to them. Yet they maintained the natural distance that came with their independent spirits. Trust had been built, but affection and deeper understanding were just beginning to grow. One bright morning, the eldest sister decided to teach the stranger about a traditional method of weaving baskets. They sat under the shade of a large oak tree, its leaves whispering in the soft breeze. The eldest sister showed him how to select the right reeds, how to bend them without breaking, and how to weave them into strong, practical shapes. The stranger listened carefully, his hands moving slowly but deliberately, mimicking her movements. He asked questions, not out of doubt but from a genuine desire to understand. "Why do you start with this pattern?" he asked softly. The eldest sister smiled. "This pattern is strong and flexible. It is made to last. Life is much like weaving. Each decision, each action adds to the strength of the whole." The middle sister, always full of energy, watched from a short distance. She decided to test his patience and humor. "Can you weave a basket without dropping it?" she teased, laughing lightly. The stranger chuckled, a rare sound that surprised even the sisters. "I will try," he said, "but if it falls, I will learn from it and try again." The youngest sister observed silently, noticing the care in his hands and the focus in his eyes. "He is not just learning," she whispered to her sisters later. "He is paying attention. Every small detail, every subtle motion he remembers. That is rare." As days turned into weeks, the stranger continued to learn from the sisters. He helped with cooking, tending animals, and repairing tools. But he did so always with respect for their methods and decisions. He never interfered or tried to take control. Instead, he adapted, observing and then carefully participating. The sisters began to see him as someone who could complement their lives rather than complicate them. One evening, after a long day of work, the sisters and the stranger sat around the fire. The eldest sister spoke first. "You have learned much in a short time," she said softly. "But more than that, you have shown us who you are through your actions. That is what matters most." The middle sister added, "You respect us, and yet you are not afraid to help when it is needed. That balance is rare. It is not easy to find someone who can do that." The youngest sister smiled faintly. "We are beginning to understand each other. You learn from us and we learn from you. It feels natural somehow. Even if strange at first, it feels right." The stranger looked at them quietly, feeling the weight and warmth of their words. "I have only followed what I believe is right," he said humbly. "I do not want to impose. I want to understand, to share, and to act only when it is helpful." The following weeks were filled with small, meaningful moments. He helped the sisters gather food from the surrounding hills, teaching them small techniques he had learned from his travels, while also listening to their traditional methods. They shared stories of their childhoods, their dreams, and their hopes for the future. Laughter often filled the air, blending with the soft rustle of the trees and the quiet hum of the village. One day, the middle sister decided to see how the stranger reacted in a situation that required courage. She challenged him to climb a steep hill to fetch a rare herb that grew only near the top. The path was treacherous, filled with loose stones and narrow ledges. Many villagers avoided it entirely, believing it too dangerous. The stranger paused, studying the path carefully. He did not rush, nor did he hesitate in fear. "I will go," he said, "but I will move carefully. The path may be steep, but each step must be taken with respect for the land." The sisters watched him go, admiring the way he navigated the climb with careful precision. When he returned with the herb, he had a quiet pride in his eyes but no boastfulness in his actions. The sisters began to notice another quality in him: patience. He never seemed rushed, even when tasks were difficult or situations uncertain. He would sit and wait for the right moment to act, whether it was helping an animal, aiding a villager, or even listening to the sisters' stories. It was a patience that came not from inexperience but from wisdom, and it impressed them deeply. As autumn approached, the bond between the stranger and the sisters continued to grow. They began to include him in more of their daily activities, not because they needed his help, but because his presence had become comforting. He was no longer just an observer or a helper. He was becoming part of the rhythm of their lives. One afternoon, while gathering firewood together, the youngest sister spoke softly. "Do you know why we watched you at first?" she asked. "We were cautious. We did not know your intentions, but now I feel that you are part of this village, even if you are not fully one of us yet." The stranger looked at her with a gentle expression. "I understand. I too was cautious at first. But I have learned that trust is earned through action, not words. You have shown me kindness, patience, and understanding. I hope I have shown the same in return." The eldest sister smiled, her eyes reflecting the late afternoon sun. "You have, more than you realize. You act with respect, humility, and courage. Those are qualities we value above all else." The middle sister laughed softly. "And you are beginning to become someone we can count on, not just as a helper, but as someone we can trust with small tasks and even big ones." As the days grew shorter and the air cooler, the sisters and the stranger began sharing more personal stories around the fire. They spoke of their dreams, their hopes, and even their fears. The stranger listened patiently, offering advice only when asked, and always with sensitivity. He shared some of his own experiences, carefully chosen, to help them understand his character without revealing too much of his past. One evening, the eldest sister asked him a quiet question. "Do you think you will stay with us?" The stranger looked at her thoughtfully, his eyes reflecting the flickering flames. "I do not know the future," he said honestly. "But I do know that I feel a connection here, one that is rare and meaningful. I wish to continue learning, sharing, and helping in ways that respect you and this village." The sisters nodded, feeling a sense of calm and understanding. They did not need him to make promises. His actions, his patience, and his respect were more than enough. Over time, they began to see him not as a stranger, but as someone who could truly belong, someone whose presence enriched their lives without threatening their independence. By the time the first frost of autumn appeared, the bond between the stranger and the sisters had strengthened. They laughed together, worked together, and shared quiet moments of reflection. The villagers, too, had come to accept him, not because of his words, but because of his consistent actions, his respect for tradition, and his willingness to help without seeking reward. The story of the stranger and the three Apache sisters had moved beyond observation and cautious curiosity. It had become a story of shared experience, mutual respect, and slowly growing affection. Each day the stranger learned more about the sisters, and each day the sisters learned more about him. The rhythm of their lives intertwined naturally, like threads in a carefully woven basket, strong, flexible, and beautiful in its simplicity. In this way, the stranger was no longer just an outsider at the edge of the village. He had become a quiet presence, valued and respected, someone who had earned a place in the hearts of the sisters. And though the future remained uncertain, the bond they shared promised that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, with patience, understanding, and mutual respect. Winter had begun to settle over the hills surrounding the village. Frosted mornings painted the world in shades of silver, and the air was crisp and fresh. Life continued at its quiet pace, yet the presence of the stranger had become an essential part of the sisters' lives. No longer merely a visitor or observer, he had become a trusted companion, someone whose actions and judgment were valued in the daily rhythm of the village. The sisters had grown comfortable with him, yet their respect for one another and for their own independence remained strong. They still led the household, managed the animals, and guided the younger villagers, but now they did so with a quiet confidence that the stranger was always nearby, ready to assist without ever intruding. The balance between independence and companionship had become a delicate, yet natural, part of their lives. One morning, the eldest sister noticed the stranger tending to the animals with a level of care and attention that went beyond simple duty. He had learned to anticipate their needs, recognizing signs of illness or distress before anyone else noticed. She watched him quietly from a distance, her admiration growing. "He has become part of this life," she said softly to her sisters later that day. "Not because we asked him to, but because he chose to be, and in doing so, he has earned our trust completely." The middle sister, always the spirited one, decided to involve him in a new challenge. "There is a hidden grove on the far side of the hills," she said with a twinkle in her eye. "It is full of wild herbs and rare plants. Few villagers dare to go there because the path is difficult and the climb steep. Will you go with me?" The stranger nodded, a quiet smile on his face. "I will go, but we must move carefully. Nature has its own rules and we must respect them." Together they climbed the hills, navigating rocky paths and dense undergrowth. Along the way, they shared stories of past journeys, dreams for the future, and even light-hearted jokes that made them laugh despite the exertion. The youngest sister had followed behind, quietly observing, her mind noting every detail of the stranger's character, his patience, his humility, and his unwavering respect for the world around him. When they reached the grove, the middle sister clapped her hands with delight. "We made it, and look at all these plants." The stranger helped gather the herbs carefully, ensuring none were damaged. It was not only the act of gathering, but the manner in which he did it, with mindfulness and reverence, that impressed the sisters. They began to understand that his presence in their lives was not just helpful, it was shaping their own understanding of patience, care, and thoughtfulness. As the days grew colder, the villagers prepared for the winter months. The stranger assisted in storing food, repairing shelters, and ensuring that the animals were safe and warm. But he did all of this without seeking attention. He worked quietly, letting his actions speak for themselves. The sisters noticed this quality in him and felt a deeper respect and connection. He had become someone who could be trusted completely, someone whose presence brought calm and stability. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and painted the sky with shades of pink and gold, the sisters gathered near the fire with the stranger. They spoke of many things: the village, the river, the past, and the future. But this evening was different. There was a subtle tension in the air, a sense that a decision long considered might finally be spoken aloud. The eldest sister spoke first. "You have become part of our lives in a way that few outsiders ever could. You observe, you help, and you respect us. You have proven your character in action, not words alone." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "We have come to trust you deeply, and we wish for you to be more than just a friend or helper." The stranger looked at her quietly, his eyes reflecting the flickering flames of the fire. "I never wished to intrude," he said softly. "I only sought to understand and to act rightly when needed, but I feel the same connection, though I did not expect it to grow so naturally." The middle sister spoke next, her voice steady but warm. "We have watched you not just with curiosity but with respect. We have seen your patience, your courage, and your humility. You honor us, and that is rare. We believe that this bond, which has grown slowly and carefully, deserves to be recognized fully." The youngest sister, always thoughtful, added quietly, "We are independent and we value that, but independence does not mean isolation. We see now that you are someone who can walk beside us, not in place of us, and that is why we trust you with more than tasks or chores. We trust you with our lives and our hearts." The stranger felt a deep warmth in his chest. It was the kind of feeling he had not expected when he first arrived at the village, when he had only been a quiet observer at the edge of their lives. He had come seeking understanding, but in doing so, he had found something far more profound, a connection built on mutual respect, trust, and admiration. With great care and humility, he spoke. "I am honored by your words. I never imagined I would be welcomed in this way. I wish to continue to share this life with you, to act with respect and care, and to honor the trust you have placed in me. If you will allow it, I would like to be with you, not as an outsider but as part of your lives, fully and respectfully." The sisters nodded together, silently acknowledging the bond that had been built over months of observation, shared work, challenges, and quiet understanding. Their trust and respect for him had grown into a deeper connection, one that was natural, thoughtful, and sincere. Preparations for a ceremony began in the following days. It was not a rushed or extravagant event, but a celebration of the bond that had grown gradually and meaningfully. The elders of the village were consulted, and the sisters' wishes were honored fully. The stranger participated with humility, learning the customs and traditions, ensuring that the ceremony respected their heritage and their family values. On the day of the ceremony, the village gathered. There was a sense of warmth and joy in the air, a quiet celebration of unity, respect, and mutual understanding. The stranger stood beside the sisters, not as a dominant presence but as a partner, fully aware of the importance of their independence and the strength of their bond. The ceremony was simple yet meaningful. Words of respect and commitment were spoken, honoring the trust, patience, and courage that had been built over months of shared life. The sisters and the stranger exchanged gestures of commitment that reflected not only affection, but also mutual admiration and understanding. It was a union born not of haste or desire alone, but of respect, experience, and thoughtful consideration. After the ceremony, the sisters and the stranger walked together through the village, quietly smiling and acknowledging the people who had supported them. Villagers offered words of congratulations, not just for the ceremony, but for the respect and harmony that had been shown throughout the stranger's time among them. Children ran to greet them, animals approached without fear, and the elders nodded with quiet satisfaction. In the days that followed, life continued as before, but with a new depth of connection. The stranger, now fully part of the sisters' lives, continued to act with the same humility, patience, and care he had always shown. He assisted when needed, learned when appropriate, and never overstepped the boundaries that had been so carefully maintained. The sisters, in turn, shared their lives more openly, trusting him not only with their work and routines but also with their hearts. Winter passed slowly, bringing long nights and short days. Fires burned in the hearths of the village, and the sisters and the stranger spent evenings together, sharing stories, planning for the seasons ahead, and enjoying the quiet joy of companionship. Their bond had grown from observation and cautious curiosity into a relationship built on respect, trust, and mutual admiration. By the time the first flowers of spring appeared, the union was fully established, a natural and respected part of village life. The stranger, once a quiet observer at the edge of the sisters' world, had become an integral presence, not through force or words, but through consistent action, patience, and care. The sisters had found someone who complemented their independence, respected their strengths, and shared in their lives thoughtfully and meaningfully. The story of the stranger and the three Apache sisters had reached a conclusion that was both simple and profound. It was a story of observation turned into understanding, curiosity transformed into trust, and respect evolving into partnership. It demonstrated that relationships built slowly, carefully, and thoughtfully could create bonds far stronger than those formed in haste. And as the village continued its quiet rhythm, the sisters and the stranger walked together through life, side by side. Their days were filled with work, laughter, learning, and the quiet joy of companionship. They had discovered that true connection was not about possession, control, or haste. It was about understanding, respect, and the willingness to walk together, honoring each other's strengths and independence. The stranger, who had once been only an outsider, had become part of the fabric of their lives, cherished and respected. And the sisters, who had once been cautious and independent, had found in him a companion who honored their freedom while sharing in their journey. Together they had created a life rooted in trust, patience, and love, a life that would continue to grow, quietly, naturally, and beautifully.